Good morning. I'm Ken Biberaj, and welcome to Coffee with Ken, a thought leadership series at the nexus of business and politics. In the news today, for the first time in 6 decades, deaths outnumbered births in China, and the Dallas Cowboys defeated the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in last night's wild card matchup. Today, we're discussing the White House Cancer Moonshot Initiative, and we're joined by its director, Dr. Danielle Carnival. Great to see you, Doc.
Good to see you too, Ken. Thanks for having me.
Well, every once in a while we have really good timing for these coffee conversations, So, last week we opened up the newspaper and it looks like the death rate from cancer fell by 1/3 over the last few years. I mean, incredible news. Tell us about that. Tell us about the moonshot. What are you focused on?
Yeah, that was great news. That is incredible progress driven by new treatments for some types of cancer, by getting better prevention and early detection, and very much by our declining smoking rates. So those are some great things to continue to build on. It gives us a little bit of a roadmap of where we know we're going to make progress, but we don't think that's enough. We're still losing, unfortunately, 600,000 Americans a year, more than 600,000 Americans a year to cancer. And so President Biden set really bold new goals. We can talk more about that, but I think that news last week gave us kind of a little bit of wind in our sails, but there's a lot that we all can contribute to reaching these new goals.
So tell us a little bit about your background and the creation of the Cancer Moonshot Initiative, right? So it was at the end of the Obama years, you actually drafted the presidential memo, right? So maybe talk a little bit about that. Then there was a break during the Trump years, and now you're back doing version 2.0, but now you're at the White House and President Biden's running this, right? So how does that impact the focus and priority of government at large?
Yeah, so you're right. The Cancer Moonshot mission started in 2016 when then Vice President Biden led an effort to double the rate of progress against cancer, a goal to which so many people, many listening here, I'm sure, and throughout the cancer community responded with passion, ingenuity, and commitment. It was really the final year of the Obama-Biden administration that led to the launch of new programs and policies and collaborations from federal agencies and the private philanthropic health and research sectors, patient groups everywhere. And like I said, these were actions that address the patient experience from diagnosis all the way through survivorship. Importantly, it included bipartisan passage of the 21st Century Cures Act. This was, I think it was signed in December by President Obama. But among other things, it contributed $1.8 billion for cancer research at NCI. And that was from that year all the way through this fiscal year. So we've really been seeing the benefit of that moving forward. Really, I think we talk about what happened in 2016 as starting a movement, really starting to change people's minds about what was possible and how we can work together and collaborate to drive new progress. And so this time around, it really builds on that. A lot of work kept happening at agencies and in the private sector. The Cancer Moonshot didn't stop. There just wasn't a White House office paying attention to it. And so when now President Biden came back, he really wanted to show that this was a priority for him. He wanted to bring kind of the structure and full force of the government behind it. And so this time we have a cancer cabinet. This brings together departments from the Departments of Defense and Health and Human Services and Labor and many others, all the way to the Environmental Protection Agency and even NASA for really interesting reasons. But this is really saying, yes, we need innovation, we need research and development, we need new ways to prevent, detect, and treat cancer. But we really need to make sure that we're bringing that same amount of innovation to how we ensure more Americans have access to the tools we already have and those we develop along the way. So it's really about driving that research, making sure there's a pathway to realize that all the way through reaching a patient, but making sure that we're not leaving behind the prevention pieces, the early detection pieces that we know have such an impact. And the goals, I've alluded to them, but the goals that he set were to decrease the cancer death rate by at least 50% over the next 25 years. So really accelerating the progress that we've seen over the first few decades of the century, and to improve the experience of people and their families and caregivers living with and surviving cancer.
So how important is it that the president personally, with his own loss, with his son, Beau Biden, And even last week in the news, the first lady having to have a procedure and being very transparent and open about what she was going through, addressing potential cancerous cells that she was addressing. We're like, these two individuals, I mean, how important and focused are they on moving forward an agenda that you're now in charge of?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is in the two examples you gave and many others that they've shared in how cancer has touched their life. It's very clear and apparent how personal this is for them. But the reason it's such a priority is because it's personal for nearly every American, right? We have these stories in our families, unfortunately, too many of us. And so that's what's really driving it. When they go around the country, when they were campaigning, and now as president and first lady, people tell them their stories. They feel connected to them because they know they have this shared experience. The other thing it did, right, the compassion side and the reason for taking this on is driven by personal experience. But what was really interesting was, and so many people can probably relate to this, once you're in the seat in that room with an oncologist and you're the patient or the caregiver or family member, it changes your perspective on how things should work and gives you a really good insight. And I think they carry that with them from their experience with Bo, from the First Lady talks about experiences back in the 90s with her friends and family as well. And they really brought that to the table to say, we understand how that feels, that there isn't enough information, it isn't clear enough, we're not moving at the pace that matters to a patient or a family member, and we need to change that.
How important is it that the moonshot is located at the White House versus NIH, HHS, right? I mean, this is a health-focused kind of priority, isn't it?
It is, but I think the reason that the president was so focused on making sure that we bring all of government together, and I mentioned a few of the agencies, but it's Defense and Veterans Affairs and Labor and Commerce and Health and Human Services, Agriculture, EPA, and NASA, like I said, and Energy. I knew I was leaving someone out. It is a health priority.
Department of Labor.
And Labor, yes. There's lots of investments and lots of policy and regulatory decisions being made by Health and Human Services that play a huge role in how we move forward. We're not undermining that or even underestimating that. Actually, in addition to the Secretary of HHS having a seat at the table, the heads of the National Institutes of Health, the National Cancer Institute, the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, CMS, and CDC within HHS are also an active part of the cancer cabinet. But like I said, this is also about prevention. It's about reaching people across the country, and VA and DoD run health systems, house entire families who are in service. And so there's a big component for them to play there. The USDA and the EPA are going to play a huge role in how we think about prevention in nutrition and lifestyle, and making sure that we're cleaning up toxic sites and reducing lead and other potential chemicals and toxins in our water supply that EPA is leading through the bipartisan infrastructure law. And just to mention why labor is such an important role, let's think about our employees. If we're a business owner, right, we can think about cancer in lots of different ways, but labor just put out at the end of last year guidelines and know your rights, know how to access the benefits and leave that you need when you're facing a cancer diagnosis or caring for someone. There's rules and laws in place that protect those employees, and that's a huge part of how people experience cancer, because your life doesn't stop with that diagnosis. And so making sure that we're thinking about all of that, taking care of all aspects of someone's life so that they can focus on getting better and getting back to work or whatever that path is for them is really important.
So in addition to leading these cancer cabinet, organizing across government, leveraging resources, there's also been a big push on innovation, right? The creation of DARPA-H. Can you tell us a little bit about that, the significance of it? This is government kind of leading, right? I think post-COVID, so many people are now focused on what government is doing as it relates to vaccine and cures and prevention and treatment and so on. So maybe talk a little bit about that and the kind of role you play, kind of connecting the dots here.
Yeah, so what you're talking about is an ARPA for Health, or an Advanced Research Project Agency for Health. Many people will remember or know well the DARPA model, which happens at Defense. that drove, the development of the internet and GPS, and actually did do some really important groundwork on RNA vaccines and many things across health and defense needs. But they're limited by mission, right? The Department of Defense mission is not focused on the human health of all Americans. And so the president had a vision and created this ARPA for health. And it sits alongside the National Institutes of Health. It's not meant to duplicate or replace what many people know NIH supports across the country. Pretty much most of the medicines we take or the understanding we have of disease and how to maintain health was funded in some part by taxpayer dollars through the NIH. It is an important part of this biomedical research engine. But there's things we haven't solved yet. And so pairing that with an agency that thinks about delivering results, that thinks about how to solve a problem rather than how to answer a scientific question, just gives us a different tool in our tool belt. And we have amazing leadership in Dr. Renee Wegerson, who's building her team. If there's people who are interested in being program managers, which means they get to decide what problems they're taking on and how to put together the right contracts and grants and combination of investments to really deliver against that. She's looking for people right now, and you can find that information on the ARPA East website.
So because cancer literally touches everyone, right? Like I don't know anybody who hasn't been impacted by cancer, whether themselves, family, friends, colleagues, coworkers, etc. Your engagement can be broad, right? I mean, it sounds like you really need help from not only foundations, educational institutions, private sector. Talk a little bit about this kind of multi-pronged approach and how you're looking to tap kind of folks outside of government as well as running a cancer cabinet inside of government.
Yeah, I mean, listen, the reason for doing this, like I said, was so personal. And we know that if we can't sit in Washington, D.C. and make decisions about what priorities are if we're not actually learning from people on the ground, really understanding those most directly impacted by cancer, how this is impacting them. And so from the beginning, we set a really broad engagement strategy, and that's one of the powers of kind of having someone sitting in the White House, a full team now, thinking about this every day. Like you said, in addition to coordinating what government's doing, we're really a place where we can engage with anyone around the country, whether that's patient groups or companies. And the president laid out pretty clearly that there's work for all of us to do. When he reignited the Cancer Moonshot last February, he called on the scientific community to bring its boldest thinking, the medical and public health community to improve outreach to and support for underserved communities, the private sector to step up, to develop and test new treatments, to share data and knowledge, to collaborate on tools that can benefit all Americans. And respectfully, he called on people living with cancer, survivors, their caregivers and families, those who've lost someone, to keep sharing their perspectives and experiences and keep pushing for progress. We have a website where people can directly engage with us. It's whitehouse.gov/cancermoonshot. There's an opportunity there to send a video and share kind of what you learned from the experience of you or someone you know going through cancer, so we can learn from that. And people can also send their ideas, their new actions or collaborations. The Cancer Moonshot isn't just a government program. We see it really as a platform to allow to highlight great work that's being done. We've done that throughout 2022, and we really want anyone who has kind of a stake in the game or an idea or a way to be better, faster, stronger, more collaborative in the work they do that's going to deliver to patients to step up and let us know what that is, and we want to shine a big light on those.
Talk a little bit about the inequity of cancer, right? Unequal access to care, to treatment, to even screenings. I mean, how much of your focus is going to be on that? How big of a problem is it where, you constantly hear about folks who just aren't getting breast cancer screenings, aren't even having the opportunity because they're working two jobs, or, their environment is causing it because of radon or lead and they don't even know about it, right? I mean, how much of the inequity is going to be a priority of yours?
Yeah, it's a huge priority. I mean, day 1 or 2 of the Biden-Harris administration, that was one of the first executive orders that they put out, that the president and the vice president, standing really strongly beside on this, put out, saying we have, in every aspect of everything the government does, we have to think about how to make it more equitable. And so the Cancer Moonshot is no different. You laid out really clearly that it's at every level, right? It's from people, communities of color and medically underserved communities living next to those toxic sites at higher numbers, right? Like it is part of what we're doing to make sure that the prevention piece is as equitable as possible. The President and First Lady from the beginning have shined a really bright light on cancer screenings and early detection. We know if we find cancer early, there's so much more that we can do. And so we had at least 10 million missed screenings as part of the COVID-19 pandemic. That puts us even further behind. And so it is a huge focus of what we're doing, and there's no one solution, right? We have to take down as many barriers as possible for people to be able to take the time they need to get those screenings, to make sure that they're getting clean water, clean air, living in an environment that isn't toxic, and then ensuring that there's pathways and someone's really guiding them through diagnosis and treatment and survivorship.
Because not everyone will have access to a Johns Hopkins, for example, right? I mean, how do we ensure that the best medical care is there if and when they decide to get screenings and treatment, right? I mean, how do you kind of spread that message? How do you lean on governors and others to kind of, improve that? I mean, is there a big gap in terms of like the technology and resources that are, spread around the country?
Yeah, a couple things that come to mind on that question. One, I mean, the numbers are that up to 70% of people receive cancer care in a community oncology setting. So we know that just having the kind of NCI designated cancer centers, some of the top research and treatment centers, cancer centers in the country, up to speed and delivering the best innovations isn't enough. So one way that I think is really important to do that is make sure that our cancer clinical trials, so testing these new innovations, testing cutting edge treatments that may deliver for people when there isn't another solution, are reaching communities. And yes, that matters to those people who are able to access those trials. But the way I think about it is we're kind of retraining the system to bring innovation into those communities. And so beyond clinical trials, how do we have those connections with the big cancer centers so that everyone has access to the best option for them in consultation with an expert in their disease?
What do you think average Americans don't know about the risks of cancer and screenings? I mean, how much of it is an education just for average Americans? Like, somebody tuning in today, like, what should they know? What's the kind of basic kind of things to keep in mind?
The biggest thing that an individual can do is make sure that they're up on their recommended screenings. And we have, without any symptoms, we have screenings for certain parts of the population, for colorectal cancer, for breast cancer, for lung cancer, and several others, so cervical cancer. And so without any symptoms, there are people across this country who should be getting seen so that we can catch those things early, because we know whether by age or exposure or smoking in some cases, that they are at higher risk for those types of cancers. So that's one thing. The other thing is we know that kind of what we eat and our level of exercise and what we expose ourselves to is having a greater and greater impact on cancer. And so nutrition is going to be a big component. We have made incredible progress, like I said, over the last few decades, and we have a vision for how to accelerate that and reach the president's goal for cutting the cancer death rate that's going to have an amazing impact on people across this country. But we can't slide back. If we start to see increases because of diabetes and obesity that we know has an interaction and increasing the likelihood of cancer, in addition to heart disease, which is still the biggest cause of death in this country, we're going to not only not get the gains, but we're going to lose, and that's people. We really want to keep the focus on keeping families together, saving and extending lives, and maintaining human health in more Americans across this country.
It strikes me that there really is a big opportunity, almost a responsibility on the part of the private sector, maybe to lead more, provide more screening opportunities, care, understanding, encouragement, right? I mean, what would you like to see from the private sector? I mean, are there examples of, companies and industries out there that you think are models that should be emulated?
Well, listen, the COVID-19 pandemic has taught us a lot, but I think this is one area where there was a lot of learning, right? The employers gave a lot of space for people to take care of their health. And I would love us to keep that perspective when we think about maybe giving specific time for recommended cancer screenings, or understanding that if someone is able to take some time to kind of do the prevention and early detection, they're going to come back into the workforce much faster than if they put that off. And so I think it's just a kind of resetting of our expectations and understanding of how to have a really successful, productive workforce, and prevention and early detection of cancer are part of making sure that that maintains long term.
And I feel like there's a very tangible economic cost argument to be made as well. The costs associated with if you're not getting the screenings and then someone does get cancer, and the impacts on them and their family, and that just overall cost dynamic is, I mean, to the economy at large in America, I mean, it must be devastating.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of data to support that. Absolutely.
Yeah. So what other metrics of success do you have year over year? The president set this massive 50% reduction over time, but what are the kind of like base hits you're looking for? What's a win? What's success look like for you every single year?
Yeah, so the way I'm measuring for us success, I think in 2022, we made a lot of progress. There's new programs that reach every state and territory as part of over $1 billion commitment from the CDC in cancer screening and early detection. That's funneling money directly to local community programs that we know work, because they know those communities best. They're culturally relevant, they're in the right language. So that's one example. The VA implementing the PACT Act, if you don't know about this, huge piece of bipartisan legislation that really says we're going to learn more about the exposures that our members of service might be experiencing while in service. But in the meantime, we're going to take care of those folks. We are counting a number of cancers and other diseases as service connected because of this exposure. And there, I think 1 million just earlier this month were already screened as part of this program. And now the benefits are kicking in and people are going to get more expedited care. So I just want to, while I talk about where our hopes are for 2023 and beyond, there's a lot of groundwork that we were able to do even in the first 9 to 10 months. Everything around additional clinical trials, launching a Cancer Moonshot Scholars Program so that the next generation of cancer kind of doctors and researchers represents more of America. So we've made a lot of down payment. 2023 and beyond, we're really going to measure it by, this was called a moonshot for a reason. We can't kind of chip away. There's lots of barriers that we do know we have to knock down, but we have to have some big, ambitious moves that get us on the track to reach that goal. And so that's what you should expect from us in this year and beyond, because the president won't settle for anything less.
No pressure. So just before I let you go, talk a little bit about some of the stuff you've been personally exposed to, right? Like some of the innovations and advancements, right? I mean, how far have we come? How quickly have things accelerated in some of the research you've seen, even from like the end of the Obama years to now the beginning of the Biden years? I mean, I'm sure you're seeing things that nobody can even imagine, right? Like even if it's just testing or pilot programs, what types of innovations do you think over the next decade Americans and, citizens around the world can expect on this fight?
Yeah, a few things. One, and I don't think anyone expects this to be on my list, but we have a vaccine that can prevent up to 7 kinds of cancer. It's been around for a while, but now it is highly recommended for a kind of 11, 12-year-old boys and girls. It's the HPV vaccine. And what is so exciting about this vaccine is that we can pretty much end cervical cancer and prevent many head and neck and other cancers in boys and girls. But think about the power of saying we took that cancer pretty much off the map. I think that, wow. And from a preventative standpoint, right? We don't have to wait until someone gets it and then cure. But I think that is one of the most exciting pieces for me. The second thing I'll mention is one of the annual meetings this year, there were, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 studies that kind of put people into remission, or even if we would call it a cure, for diseases that we didn't think that was possible. Now, these trials were small, but it's starting to show how we use all of the tools that have been developed over the last couple of decades, whether it's using our immune system to fight cancer, or really targeting the specific changes in DNA that lead to that cancer. There is just this, what we call precision medicine, of saying, I know exactly why this cancer formed, and we can target it with something that wipes it out. That, again, there's a lot to be proven there, but for those patients who were on that trial who didn't have to go through additional surgeries and longer treatment and are cancer-free or virtually cancer-free right now, that is exciting. And then the third thing is on the early detection side. There's a lot of companies developing technologies that can hopefully detect cancer from a blood test. And think about how that changes our approach to early detection. Now, there's a lot to understand as to kind of, are we detecting cancers that we wouldn't otherwise, and are we now saving and extending lives in a meaningful way? That's going to be important before this goes out more broadly. But that could really change the game of how we think about early detection for cancer.
That's amazing. Doctor, pleasure having you on. Amazing. I feel kind of optimistic and refreshed after this. I mean, you never know what you're going to get into when you're having such a high-level conversation about something so important as this. I mean, amazing to see the White House throwing the full force of government, creating a cancer cabinet, and congrats and kudos to you for all your efforts. Thanks for being here. Appreciate everyone tuning in today. You can catch up on this episode and other sessions of Coffee with Ken on coffeewithken.com. Next session is going to be in early February with Seth Goldman, the founder of Eat the Change. So we'll be able to ask him about the importance of what we eat and nutrition and wellness. Appreciate everybody tuning in. Visit our website. You can also tune in on Spotify, iHeartRadio, and Google Play. Take care. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Ken.